Hello, I'm Lois Zamora, and I am in the English department of the University of Houston. I'm delighted to welcome you to this online course, The Introduction to Latin American Studies. From what I've seen of the list of students, some of you are seniors, architecture majors, some of you are art historians, sociologists, psychologists, one person in education. Welcome. This is a very exciting group of students, and I hope you're going to like this course because I'd like to think that we're an exciting group of teachers, professors from the University of Houston and elsewhere, who are going to be lecturing in this class on Latin American cultures, histories, and peoples. We call our Introduction to Latin American Studies course Hemispheric and Global Perspectives, and I think you'll find that there is going to be a wide range of perspectives on Latin America. When I say a wide range of perspectives, what I'm indicating in part is a wide range of disciplinary perspectives. We're going to have historians, art historians, in my own case literature, literary critic, and also art and architecture, which I'm very interested in Latin America, the Baroque in particular. We'll be talking to you from our disciplinary perspective. So we hope to offer you a number of ways into thinking about Latin America. My lecture this morning is going to be a kind of introduction. It'll be your lecture for week number 1 in the course. And I would like to just say a couple of things about the mechanics of the course before I begin to talk about Octavio Paz's essay, Mexico and the United States, and the first 2 chapters of Carlos Fuentes' book, The Buried Mirror. This semester, I will be asking you to participate in the discussion board or the discussion function of the Blackboard website. I will post questions every week involving what the faculty member that is lecturing that week is talking about and involving the readings for that week. I do require that you participate in the discussion board. It's a way to think together about what we're doing. I also will ask you to take a reading and lecture quiz at the end of every 2 weeks. All of this is very, I hope, clearly outlined on your syllabus, dates and times of the reading quizzes, dates and times of other assignments. There will be no midterm because we're having these reading quizzes as we go along. There's a final exam and a final paper. They're described on your syllabus, and I'm always on the email of our website in case you have questions. But as we go along, all of this will become clearer to you, the requirements, the nature of the final paper, and so forth. It seems early in the game to go into that with too much detail. But the structure of the course is that there are usually two videos every week. It varies, but they'll be clearly labeled and are clearly labeled on our class website. So watching the videos, doing the reading, and keeping up by virtue of the reading quizzes that we will have every 2 weeks. So I hope that the structure of the course is amenable to you as an online course. There will be no face-to-face meetings, though I'm certainly in my office regularly and by appointment as well, so we should be in close touch. You'll see after this lecture the name of Susan Kellogg on the introductory material. Susan Kellogg is a historian. She actually constructed this course a couple or 3 years ago, so she is also the teacher of record, but it's I this semester who will be grading and conversing and keeping track and so forth. So please, email, the U of H email, and then the email on our class website are available to you. Any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Now, this morning, what I'd like to do is begin with The Buried Mirror. I have the hardcover copy of the basic text for this course. You'll find, I believe, the paperback in the bookstore or online. It's a richly illustrated, as they say in the ads, book. Carlos Fuentes, a great Mexican novelist, now 80 years old, astonishingly, is very much interested in the way that culture works. And he is interested in how visual culture will inform us. Art, architecture, the material things that we see around us, and how we can understand Latin American history in this way. So I hope you'll enjoy this approach to history and to culture in Latin America. It's very, as I say, based on visual artifacts. So let's begin with this. We're going to move on then, and I'll walk you through Octavio Paz's essay called Mexico and the United States. I think that the first two chapters of The Buried Mirror, which are about Spain, and then Octavio Paz's look at the ways in which Spain and England colonized the Americas, and as a result, how North American Anglo culture is very different from Latin American Hispanic culture, will be a good place for us to start thinking about the topic for this course. If you haven't read these texts, please stop the video now and read them, and then turn the video back on and listen to what I have to say. My lectures and several of our faculty members' lectures are based on the idea that you've done the reading before seeing the text, before seeing the video rather, that the text accompanies and supports the lecture. So anyway, I am now assuming that you have read the first two chapters of The Buried Mirror, and I want to go through some of the important points with you. Read the introduction as well as the first two chapters. It's listed on your syllabus as required. Here Carlos Fuentes is rather explicit about what he's going, his perspective. He's a novelist. He's a historical novelist, if you want, but this gives him license to give his opinions, to say what he thinks is important about Latin America as a general matter, and to say what he is going to argue. So let's say that I don't think there is such a thing as objective history, but he doesn't even pretend to objectivity. He's saying, this is what I think, and this is how I see things. I like the way he sees things, which is why I think this is a very interesting and useful book for our purposes. But look at the beginning. The page 8 is the beginning of the introduction. He starts with 1492. We're going to have chapters on indigenous culture that are pre-1492, but he says he begins with Christopher Columbus and the idea of having reached China, the Indies, mistakenly, and so forth. Here, this very first paragraph requires that you click on the maps on your website. You'll see that there's a folder for maps, and there are maps scattered throughout the different weekly folders. Please always, when a reference to topography, geography is mentioned, do look at the map that is provided for you. Here, I think it's the trade routes from of Spain and Portugal is a good map for looking at how the world is deployed. And I guess I stress maps because I myself never studied geography in the way that I feel I wish I had, and so I'm constantly needing to consult to see how things are set out on our globe. So look at the map. We're going to look at the map. I want you to look at the map of Spain too, contemporary Spain, as we get into these chapters. But so look at the map and see the ways in which things are organized. If you maybe you already have that fully in your head, but I do provide a lot of maps on the website because I think they're important. He gives us a kind of lyrical, poetic notion of what Columbus had in mind, discovering a utopia even though he didn't realize exactly where he was on the face of the earth. The top of page 9, this utopian foundation of the New World, which quickly goes bad, as he says, but there's a great deal of utopian discourse. One of Columbus's letters back to the Catholic kings, to his patrons, says something he thinks he's found the site of the terrestrial paradise and so forth. There's a great deal of this sense of potential, as you know, that is then betrayed in some ways, and in many ways with indigenous cultures that are found in the New World. But look here, page 9, he's saying, look, I want to talk about a certain Pan-American idea. My idea is not just to deal with Mexico, not just with the Caribbean, that there's a kind of cultural continuity. We were all invaded, we were all colonized by Spain or Portugal or Holland or wherever in Latin America. There are some Dutch colonies, as you know, in the Caribbean and so forth. He's not concerned with that, and he's not concerned with the Portuguese colonization either. Brazil is not here. This is the subtitle of this book, is Reflections on Spain and the New World. So it's the Spanish New World that he's interested in, although we'll certainly talk about Brazil in this course. But he's talking about a kind of Pan-Americanism, and then I want you to notice that he here, if you'll turn the page to page 10, the paragraph that begins, "This book is therefore dedicated." It's about a third of the way down the page. He's telling us what he's going to do. "This book is therefore dedicated to a search for the cultural continuity that can inform and transcend the economic and political disunity and fragmentation of the Hispanic world." This is his purpose, to find a kind of suitable social and economic discourse that will tell us something about the whole. So you're going to see there's going to be a chapter on Bolivia, a chapter on Argentina. It's a very wide-ranging idea that nonetheless says some of us have, or all of us have, a lot in common, not everything. So this statement of purpose, I direct your attention to it here on page 10, and then he plays, really starting at the bottom of page 10 through the end of page 11, which is the end of the introduction, with the metaphor of the mirror. Now, you'll see that he has a number of uses for that metaphor. He wants us to think about the way that the Spanish New World reflects Spain in the Old World, that obviously the continuity, if you want, the reflection of European colonization and culture in the New World. He uses the importance of the obsidian mirror, Tezcatlipoca, the god of the smoking mirror, and so forth. If you're really looking to trace the argument here, there isn't one. He's giving us a few different ideas about mirrors and how reflections work, and how this mirror fantasy, the mirror effect, if you want, between fantasy and reality. So I'm not going to do too much with the metaphor of the mirror. It's going to come up, this buried mirror idea. He starts with a mirror, an polished obsidian mirror, or polished obsidian stone, that was used in pre-Columbian, pre-Cortesian culture in Mexico by indigenous groups for different reasons, including one that is buried, we're told, has been found in the ruins of El Tajín, the Veracruz ceremonial site, on the Gulf Coast, to light the way of the dead ruler in the underworld. All of these, what do we do with them? We enjoy them, I guess. I don't think it's really a recipe for reading this book very, very exactly. But there we have it. Okay, so the introduction is a statement of his Pan-Americanism. It also is a statement, and not so clear here as what we'll see in a moment, but turn back to page 9 if you would. The theme of cultural mixing, of cultural diversity, the celebration of Latin American cultural diversity, is going to be a thread throughout Carlos Fuentes' book. I think he's distinguishing himself in part from what he considers to be a less diverse culture in North America. I think he's perhaps wrong, but the celebration of mestizaje, of cultural mixing, is something that he is going to say is one of the great strengths of Latin America, and I believe that he's correct. Look at what he says just at the bottom of 9, and I'll point it out to you when he's even talking about Spain and how Spain is a group of different cultures that have sometimes mixed, sometimes matched, sometimes conflicted, but that these differences are strengths. Look at the very bottom of page 9. He speaks of, look at that whole paragraph. The crisis that has impoverished us has also put the wealth of our culture back in our own hands and forced us to realize that there is not a single Latin American from the Rio Grande to Cape Horn who is not an heir to each and every aspect of our cultural heritage. This is where both the pan-Americanism and the celebration of diversity come in. This is what I wish to explore in this book. The heritage of these cultural strains. It ranges from the stone of Chichen Itza and Machu Picchu to the modern Indian influences in painting and architecture, from the Baroque art and of the colonial era to the contemporary literature of Jorge Luis Borges and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. From the multifaceted European presence in Latin America, Iberian and through Iberia, Mediterranean, Roman, Greek, and also Arab and Jewish, to the singular and suffering black African presence, from the caves of Altamira to the graffiti of East Los Angeles and so forth. So you see what he's doing here is already celebrating. Let me finish this is the top of page 10 now. And from the earliest immigrants to the Bering Strait to the latest undocumented workers crossing the border at Tijuana, San Diego. So this kind of celebration of diversity, but within the Pan-American, let's say, umbrella, that's not right, within a kind of shared cultural context. Okay, that's the introduction. I didn't mean to take quite so much time, but I think Fuentes is laying out his territory rather in general terms in the introduction, and it's important to pay attention. By the way, do save October 12th. That's Columbus Day, as you know, the Dia de la Raza, as it's called in Mexico, the day of when Columbus set foot on, we're not quite sure, a small island, Fuentes says, in the Caribbean in 1492. Carlos Fuentes will be in Houston, and he'll be reading from his work on the evening of Tuesday, October 12th. I can't require that you come, since it'll be either at the Alley Theater or at the Wortham downtown. Carlos Fuentes is a great presence in Houston. He's lectured many times here. Maybe some of you have heard him. And he has been invited by InPrint, the community support group for our creative writing program that has a readers series. So it's perfect that he's reading on October 12th, and I hope you will save that date. We will have a couple of lectures in the afternoon of October 12th as well in the Honors Commons, and I'll be giving you more information on that. To celebrate to commemorate the discovery of America. As we know, discovery is the wrong word. The people living in America knew who they were. They didn't need to be discovered, but let's say the encounter of European and American cultures and peoples. So we're going to commemorate, celebrate, and also think about Mexico's centenary of the independence, the revolution, and bicentenary of their independence from Spain. So it's a very big year for Mexico in terms of anniversaries. 100 and 200 year anniversaries of historical events that you'll be learning a lot more about. We have a whole lecture on the Mexican Revolution coming up by John Hart, our wonderful historian of the Mexican Revolution and Mexico. I'm sure some of you have studied with him. Okay, let's go to chapter 1. Chapter 1 and 2 are very much prefatory. They're about Spain. They're not about Latin America, so they're prefatory to our main concern in this course, but I think very worthwhile reading. Please read Fuentes as a as I say, as a novelist, as a writer who's interested in the nice turn of phrase. He's interested in saying something trenchant about a painting that is beside the text you're reading. This is, as I say, a special kind of history, and one that I find terribly interesting since I'm in literature and art. I hope you will as well. Okay, let me just point out a few things. The first chapter is called Sun and Shadow, and Fuentes, like he does with the mirror, now takes a couple of icons, cultural icons of Spain, and twirls them around, if you want. The metaphors here, as you know, because you've read the text, I hope, are the bullfight. He goes on quite a lot about the bullfight and the ways in which this can say a lot about the Spanish character, and does. He moves to mother figures, the Dama de Baza, the funerary goddess. We see a picture of her. You'll just go on in, start flipping the pages, and you'll see her her picture on page 26, a small statue. We also, a figurine if you want, we have the Dama de Elche on page 27, a kind of opposite figure, the temptress, the siren. So that's both, let's say, the quiet funerary figure and the more tempestuous female figure. Ageless sign of erotic secrecy, we're told. This is the novelist speaking. And then we move to the processions of the Virgin. If you just look at the pages, the pictures, you'll have a sense of the argument, the importance of the Virgin in Spanish Catholicism, which we're certainly going to see more of with Latin America. And then he ends with the flamencos. The flamenco dancer, the hybridity of the flamenco dance, the gypsy, the Spanish, and so forth, the sensuality and yet the saintliness. He likes to play, as does Octavio Paz, with oppositions. But I think this first chapter is particularly light in the sense of taking these cultural icons and telling us something about them. Look, if you will, on page 16. There's just one passage here that I think is worth looking at, and it's because it's another early statement of Fuentes' thesis on the importance of cultural heterogeneity in Latin America. He says at the bottom of page 16 there are two constants, two threads, if you want, that are Spanish, are part of the Spanish character and culture. The bottom of page 16, that paragraph, that the last paragraph on 16, let's look at it together. He's going to tell us what these two are, and it's the second that I want you to pay attention to in particular. The Spanish context seems to have two constants. First, that each commonplace is denied by its opposite. The eroticism and the otherworldliness of the Virgin that he's going to talk about here, of saints, of saintly figures. We're going to see some more in the next chapter. Okay, that one first, that each commonplace is denied by its opposite. There is, for instance, the colorful romantic Spain of Byron and Bizet, the French composer of Carmen, the opera, as you probably know. That's the one Spain. But then here's this opposite, the somberly clad aristocratic figure of El Greco or Velázquez. We're going to see the El Greco, if you want to turn there now. Where's our El Greco? He is around here someplace. Hang on. That wonderful, it's page 42, the gentleman with hand on his breast, page 42. So you may not, I wish they'd put a figure number in parentheses to direct you to that, but this somberly clad aristocratic figure of El Greco or Velázquez. And these in their turn are adjacent to the deeply uncompromising extreme figures of a Goya or a Buñuel. We're going to have a whole chapter on Goya and Buñuel, the filmmaker. You see how he's tracing the historical character by the products of the culture and the visual products? He's got a great eye, Carlos Fuentes. And that's why I'm so happy that I see one of you, at least one of you is an art history person and two architecture people. It's wonderful to think about history in terms of the visual artifacts of that culture, and that's what he's doing here. So he's saying, okay, Spain, you have the lively, sunny, romantic Spain, you have the dark, somber Spain, you have the deeply uncompromising, extreme figures, and so forth. That's the first constant, that there are oppositions that seem to be complementary or perhaps conflictual, and sometimes both. So you have these oppositions that we're going to see operating. Number two, and this is the one that I think is the more important thread for not only Spain but for this book, and that is the second constant of Spanish culture, the very last line on page 16. As revealed in the artistic sensibility is the capacity to make the invisible visible by embracing the marginal, the perverse, the excluded. This is this heterogeneity argument. By embracing the marginal, the perverse, the excluded. We're going to talk about it more when we get to Octavio Paz. This rhythm and richness of opposites is the result of an even more basic Spanish reality which no other country in Europe except perhaps Russia which is that no other country in Europe except perhaps Russia has been invaded and settled by so many people. So there's the cultural heterogeneity argument, the celebration of hybridity, of diversity, of cultural mixing. So that's chapter one. It's a quick job on chapter one, but I think you'll find it fairly easy to follow. And chapter two, I think Fuentes is easy to follow in that he has subcategories and lays things out. The next chapter is about the founding of Spain. From the very beginning, 2000 BC, with the tribal peoples called the Iberians, that Iberian Peninsula. Look at your map now, will you? I'm not showing it on this video, I should be, but if you look at the map of contemporary Spain as you're reading chapter 2, or look at it now as we're talking about it, I think you'll find it helpful. He speaks in various stages of history of the peoples who have invaded and settled the Iberian Peninsula. Look at your map. He talks about the interior of the peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal. You'll see the boundary line of Portugal there on your map. The Celts, the Iberians, tribal peoples who settle the interior, the coastal area of the Mediterranean, and of course the Atlantic. Spain has nothing but coast, practically, just a little land connection up there to France. But it's especially the Mediterranean coast that is settled by Phoenicians in about 1000 BC and Greeks. He talks then about the Roman invasions. You'll follow this as you go. The Mediterranean moving to the far west known world, which is Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. The Romans who invade in 200 BC, they win control of the peninsula in 133 AD. These are dates he gives you. He then speaks of the very important date of 711, which is the Muslim or Arab invasion and conquest of the peninsula. Let's look at, he has a whole section called Roman Spain. I'm going to leave it to you to look at that. He speaks of the national character of the Ibero-Romans as they now become under the Roman imperial domination of the peninsula. Here again, he's using the El Greco portrait that we just looked at to talk about a kind of national character, a certain sort of stoicism. He speaks of the Roman Spanish writer, Seneca, philosopher, who is a Stoic. He invents Stoicism as a philosophical matter. And so you'll see there's a discussion on page 38. I don't think we need to read it together, of Roman Stoicism. he himself likes oppositions. Go to page 41. I do think here there's a nice opposition. Again, still talking about the kind of cultural heritage that's going to come to the New World 700 years later, but we're talking now about the mid 7th and 8th centuries. Well, even earlier, really, the end of Roman domination comes really in the 5th century with, as he points out, the invasion of the Visigoths. But look, if you will, at page 41, this idea of national character, or the character of a people. We know that at the same time he's celebrating heterogeneity and different peoples coming together in different cultures, even on the Spanish peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, rather, before we even begin to talk about the diversity of Europe meeting America. He's stressing this point of groups interacting. So look at the top of 41, Iberian individualism and Roman Stoicism bred the essential Spanish figure of the hidalgo, literally the son of something. Hijo de algo, the son of something. This hidalgo, that is the inheritor, the man of honor, the man of his word, the man of noble exterior and equally noble interior. El Greco gives us the definitive version of this ideal in his painting, Gentleman with his hand on his breast. Cervantes, in the literary counterpoint of the figure with the gentleman, in the figure of the gentleman with the green cloak in Don Quixote. So here you see Fuentes makes his move here. I want you to start noticing how he's making his arguments. He's talking about the Iberian groups on the Iberian Peninsula, their individualism, along with the Roman Stoicism, and then he goes straight to a painting and straight to a novel to make to give us examples of what he's talking about. So this fusion of individualism and Stoicism, he continues on the top of 41, deeply affected the Spanish manner of accepting Roman law. I want you to pay close attention to this section 41, Roman Spain. It starts actually page 38, because the institutions of the state, the law, the civil law tradition, the Roman law tradition, which operates in Mexico, unlike ours, which is the common law from England, the very different system of laws, which we can talk about at some point. Maybe I'll post something on our discussion board about that, a very essential difference in the ways that Anglo North America and Hispanic Latin America think about the state and operate the state in terms of legal systems. So we have our Ibero-Romans up through page 45 when we get our Visigoths. That's really the last of what I count to be 6 groups of people that he's traced up until now. The Celt-Iberians, number 1, the Phoenicians and Greeks, number 2, the Romans, the Muslim invasion of 711. As you know, Spain is a tripart, well, you'll find out next week in that reading, the tripartite culture of Spain, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, from 711, basically, from the establishment of Muslim domination, especially in the south of Spain, but throughout, except for the Basque Country, the north of Spain, which never was conquered by anybody, which is why the Basques in the north of Spain speak a language that's not at all related to Spanish or Portuguese or French. It's not Romance or Latin based. But anyway, so Muslims, the 711 forward, and then I guess it's actually 5. Then the Visigoths is the 6th group the 5th group that he talks about on page 43. So do follow this over the centuries, beginning 2000 BC up until the really till about 1492. We are getting kind of the pre-American Spain. And then with chapter 3, we're going to start in a period which is consonant with the contact of Spain and the New World. So 1492 is a fulcrum here. The first 2 chapters of Fuentes are really before 1492, and then after chapter 3 on is going to be much more focused on Spain as it relates to Latin America, and then completely on Latin America. So you'll see from the table of contents how the chronology of this work is set out. Look, will you, at the discussion of Zurbarán, page 44. I like to go to the art, as you see already. At the bottom, 4 lines from the bottom of page 44, we get the mention of Francisco de Zurbarán, a fabulous 17th century Baroque painter. Later on in the course, I'll give you a lecture on the Latin American Baroque. But we get pictures of saints, his pictures. There's one on 32, which starts the chapter, Saint Lucy with her eyes on a platter. Her eyes are also in her head, as you'll see. Martyrs may be martyred with their heads cut off, but their heads are usually still on their shoulders because a martyr has triumphed over his enemies, of course. So usually paintings, and especially Baroque paintings of martyrs, can be bloody at times, but you will always see the palm. You see the palm in St. Lucy's left hand. When there's a palm, that's always a sign of a martyrdom. But you see she's looking quite content with herself. And the other is St. Agatha. We're given, she's on page 47. Her martyrdom was to have her breasts cut off, and so that's why her breasts are on a platter, though she seems to be quite whole underneath her dress. One more of these victorious martyr paintings. But the point about Zurbarán is that we get a kind of erotic vision and an otherworldly vision. Remember those oppositions, a sensuality and a spirituality at the same time. This is very typical of the Spanish Baroque and of the Mexican Baroque as well. But I point out his mention of Zurbarán. Let's look at it again. He gets to actually discussing Zurbarán on the bottom of page 44. Lacking all contemporary illustrations of these martyred Spanish women, we can imagine them as depicted by the painter Francisco de Zurbarán in the 17th century, dressed in handsome gowns and bearing the symbols of their torture. His young women are some of Zurbarán's most noteworthy martyrs. Legend has it that the Mediterranean Saint Lucy with the eyes, take a look at her again. She's quite elegant. Page 32. Legend has it that the Mediterranean Saint Lucy, who was sacrificed in Syracuse, was denounced by her rejected suitor as a Christian, whereupon a Roman soldier killed her by thrusting his sword into her throat. She is represented with her eyes on a platter. St. Agatha, now we just looked at her, but let's look at her again. Turn the page, just 147. Carries her breasts on yet another platter. She too was courted by a rejected suitor who denounced her as a Christian. These are early Roman Christians who were outlaws, you see, and died for their Christian beliefs, as legend has it. Her breasts were cut off, and she became the patroness of bell founders and bakers. You see why it's kind of funny, actually. The bell founders, the breasts on the platter look like bells, as you can see, and the bakers for obvious reasons as well. So much for the powers of metamorphosis and so forth. He goes on a bit more. This is in the context of his discussion of Christian and Catholic Spain. We will see much more of this when we talk about the Baroque and when we get to the chapters on the Baroque in Latin America. Deeply, deeply Catholic, absolutely. The Catholicism in Mexico, in Latin America, is very tied to Spanish ideas and Roman ideas of how best to communicate belief and faith, and that is in painting and in beautiful altarpieces and interiors. So we're going to talk more about that in the course of our course. What else? Seville, aha, Isidore. Just I point out to you the Saint Isidore of Seville, 598 AD. We're still very early. It's the last section of this chapter. You'll see there's a section on him, I believe, yes, beginning on page 45, the Saint of Seville. And here, Fuentes isn't giving us the whole array of people whom he might discuss. He's picking out one, an important one, and making him, like he makes the paintings and the novels, representative of a certain, let's say, cultural outlook, a certain historical and cultural desire for a culture, for a kind of world. Isidore puts things in order, we're told. He's a cleric, of course. Look at the bottom of 48. He addresses the great question. Let's just read it here. Why paraphrase? Go up. Let's do that bottom paragraph on 48, and then we'll move on to other things. At the age of 43, on his brother's death, Isidore inherited the bishopric of Seville. He became bishop. He was now able to campaign for a new agreement between church and state. He had strengthened the church through discipline while the monarchy floundered in undiscipline. He had swept away the confusion of Gothic and Byzantine laws in favor of a precise continuity of Roman law and its clear, logical, and architectural sense of procedure. What's fair? You need a process. There's certain ways of going about a legal matter. So he puts things in order according to Fuentes. I mean, it would be very interesting. Here's a great paper topic, you know, Isidore of Seville and Roman law and how he established certain norms. There's so much in this book that could be a whole other book. Fuentes has to trip the light fantastic. He has to move quickly, but that doesn't mean that you all do, because your paper topic I will ask you to write on something that's been touched upon or covered in class and take it further than we've been able to in what for us too is a tripping of the light fantastic. We don't have time to do everything. So Isidore of Seville, he continues. Here's what Fuentes continues to say. He rooted Roman law. Now he put all of this at the service of the great question that dominated European politics until the late Middle Ages, the relationship between church and state. After the disappearance of the Roman bureaucrats, the bishops of Spain had become the real administrators of the country, which gave Isidore a political advantage. The chaos and incompetence of the Gothic kings, the Visigoths, remember that fifth wave of invaders, had compounded the situation. Isidore, a man of balance, did not propose the supremacy of either church or state, top of page 49, but advanced the idea that the state should be subordinate to the church in spiritual matters and the church to the state in secular ones, and so forth. I'm going to let you finish that, but here we look at Isidore as kind of consolidating some of these big questions, but in the 6th century. The date is given at the top of 48, 598, as a kind of, so we're talking about the 600s in Spain, way before 1492. But we're going to go quickly from there on. So if you take these first 2 chapters as a kind of introduction to the way that Fuentes operates in this book, as well as an introduction to Spain and therefore of Spanish Latin America, I think you'll I should say, Spanish America, you will have a good beginning. Now, without too much ado, I would like to go on to the essay that's assigned as well for this first week, and that is Octavio Paz's essay called Mexico and the United States. This essay, written by the Nobel Prize winner, Octavio Paz, was published first in the New Yorker in 1979. So you may say, well, it seems quite dated, but I think there are certain things that are going to be useful for us in this course if we think about why Anglo-America and Hispanic America are so different. We're going to be looking at Latin America, but I can't see you, I don't know. I, looking at Latin America, am a comparatist by definition, because I was born and raised in the US. So then I start to think, well, how is Mexico different from the US and why? And then I've spent 30 years going to Mexico and living there, in fact, and teaching there some. And so I have ways of comparing and contrasting, and that's what Octavio Paz is doing as well. And I want to run through his argument, and I do have a little outline, which if you take a look and maybe write down some of the page numbers, we won't have to go quite as textually carefully as we would otherwise. But first of all, Octavio Paz is interested in, he starts by saying that Mexico and the US are two different versions of Western civilization, two distinct versions of Western civilization, page 357. This essay, of course, is posted in PDF on your first week folder in it. So do print it out. I recommend printing these things out and writing in the margins. I don't know how you all do. I know some people are good at just reading on the screen, but I think the essays that are required for this course you should print out and mark up as you listen to the lectures. So that's page 357, and now he's going to tell us why he thinks we are two different versions of Western civilization. He does concern himself with what civilization is and what culture is. If you go to page 358, at the bottom, he's speaking about what civilization is. If you'll go up, and this is very consonant with what we've just seen Fuentes doing, talking about a culture in terms of its artistic products, or I won't even say artistic, in terms of its artifacts, the way it represents itself to itself, the paintings, the statuettes, if you want, the obsidian mirror, and so forth. Look about 6 lines up from the bottom of 358, and you'll see this same impulse to define culture in terms of its artifacts and then make generalizations about its people. Let's start the whole paragraph, that last paragraph, the bottom paragraph on 358. Of course, the differences between Mexico and the United States are not imaginary projections, but objective realities. Some are quantitative and can be explained by the social, economic, and historical development of the two countries. That's what this whole essay is going to be about, showing the differences. He says, but still, the more permanent ones, though also the result of history, are not easily definable or measurable. I have pointed out that they belong to the realm of civilization, that fluid zone of imprecise contours, in which are fused and confused ideas and beliefs, institutions and technologies, styles and morals, fashions and churches, the material culture, and that evasive reality which we rather inaccurately call le génie des peuples, a French phrase meaning national character or cultural, communal character. The way people are in a given culture or nation, if you want. Any such generalization about national or cultural character is problematic, and yet there are certain things one might say about the US and about Mexico that are true about U.S. and Mexico, and that's where he's headed. But he's very good at first about wanting to define what he means by civilization, what he means by culture, and he gives us this really rather interesting list of immeasurable but permanent aspects of culture. Styles and morals, fashions and churches, material culture, and so forth. Okay, so culture as a historical process, but culture as also as accumulation, cultural artifacts, instruments for preserving and transmitting information. He's going to look at these aspects of what we call as a whole culture, right? Okay, so he starts and he says, let's look at the differences, though. These are things that are immeasurable, but they're historical realities too. And this is where my list comes in, because he says, first of all, think of the very different indigenous populations that were discovered, again, I misuse the word, that were encountered by the English as opposed to the Spanish. He says there were nomadic groups. He's talking about, of course, the early development of the nation of the United States, which is the eastern seaboard. And he's talking about really Massachusetts and Virginia, well, less Virginia, Massachusetts, nomadic groups, as opposed to settled indigenous groups, agricultural groups in Mesoamerica. This argument starts at the bottom of well, if you look in particular 359 through 362, he's going to be focusing on the differences in indigenous populations and the ways in which they operated. Look at, again, I don't want to read this whole thing to you, so let me just tell you to look for 359 and 360 and even up through 362, the importance of the differences of indigenous groups in Mexico and in North America. Look at 362, and here I do want to read this with you because he's taking the U.S. reader of the New Yorker article in 1979 to task here, I think, a bit. Let's look at the middle paragraph of 362. In the United States, the Indian element does not appear. This, in my opinion, is a major difference between our two countries. The Indians who were not exterminated were corralled in, quote, reservations, unquote. The Christian horror of fallen nature extended to the natives of America. The United States was founded on a land without a past. You see, that's quite ironic, and it's a terrible indictment. The English settlers came and had no interest in converting indigenous populations. We'll talk about it in a minute. For this reason, one of the most powerful and persistent themes in American literature, from Whitman to William Carlos Williams and from Melville to Faulkner, has been the search for or invention of American roots. We owe some of the major works of the modern era to this desire for incarnation, this obsessive need to be rooted in American soil. This is a critique of a Mexican intellectual. You Americans, you U.S. Americans, you don't recognize, honor your indigenous past. You corral, and the minute you lead land, you push the indigenous peoples westward until there is very little left. Now, if you go to North Dakota, if you go to North and South Dakota, if you go to the Southwest, but he here is really focusing on the foundation of the nation of the United States. And of course, we remember that the Southwest was still Mexican until 1848. So here he's talking about the foundation of the U.S. Let's keep on going. Exactly the opposite is true of Mexico. Land of superimposed pasts. Mexico City was built on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec city that was built in the likeness of Tula, the Toltec city that was built in the likeness of Teotihuacan, the first great city on the American continent. Every Mexican bears within him this continuity which goes back 2,000 years. It doesn't matter that this presence is almost always unconscious and assumes the naive forms of legend and superstition. It is not something known, but something lived. That's my favorite line in this essay, and I love this essay. It's not something known, but something lived. That's culture. But he's saying it's a particular kind of culture in Mexico. This 2,000 years of indigenous past. A given Mexican working in an office or a lawyer or a doctor, whatever, won't think of an indigenous past as his. He says, but it's lived in our culture. And if you go to Mexico, if you've been to Mexico, you sense it. You know it. The indigenous past is present in Mexico. That's Octavio Paz's argument. It doesn't mean indigenous groups in Mexico are treated as fairly as they ought to be in the South, Chiapas, the state of Chiapas, for example, social injustices, lack of resources, and so forth. But the legend, even superstition, he says, this naivete, but good, of indigenous foundations of Mexican contemporary culture. Let's just keep on going. After that line that I do hope you'll mark in your margin, it's not something known, but something lived, the indigenous past. The Indian presence means that one of the facets of Mexican culture is not Western. Is there anything like this in the United States? Each of the ethnic groups making up the multiracial democracy that is the United States has its own culture and tradition, and some of them, the Chinese and Japanese, for example, are not Western. These traditions exist alongside the dominant American tradition without becoming one with it. They are foreign bodies within American culture. In some cases, the most notable being that of the Chicanos, the minorities defend their traditions against or in the face of the American tradition. The Chicanos' resistance is cultural as well as political and social. Well, there are things to disagree with there, but what he's saying is the U.S. is a melting pot. You melt after a generation or two into an American mainstream. That's his argument. You may want to disagree. Certainly we're more diverse as a nation, the U.S., than we were in 1979, I think. I know, in terms of immigration statistics, in terms of what we know even here at the University of Houston about our diversity. But his point is it's not part of the culture. It's a foreign body within an Anglo mainstream. Those English-only laws that have been enacted and I think also judged unconstitutional in some states do suggest that he has a point here, but we might want to disagree, and that's a point I'm going to put up on our discussion board. I'm interested in your understanding of your own culture, that is the U.S. culture, and maybe some of you are from elsewhere, and it's interesting for us to speculate about how the U.S. may have changed in the 30 or so years since this was first written. Okay, so that's this first business about the different indigenous groups that were encountered and how they were handled leads us right away to our second point, which is the importance of religion and how the indigenous groups were handled. Obviously, the Spanish conquest and colonization of the New World was done under the banner of the Catholic Church. Conquest was always justified, conquest and colonization were justified by conversion, all those C words. Conquest and colonization were justified by converting indigenous peoples in Catholicism. Why? Because Catholicism believes itself to be the one true church. If you're the one true church, you have to find room for everyone. So you accommodate indigenous practices. The Catholic Church is very good at accommodating different practices because, well, these are people of the same Catholic God as ours, and so we must convert them. Now you can say, and Paz says it in another article, you can say that the Catholic colonizers weren't so terrifically good to their converts, and indeed they weren't, worked them terribly, and smallpox and huge decimations of populations. But Octavio Paz in another essay says, you'll laugh, but we were better to our indigenous populations than the North American Protestants who simply ignore them, toss them out of the cosmos, he says. Because what is the difference here on page, the imperial projects of Spain and England, the Catholics versus the Protestants? I've given you the page numbers, you've read the essay, we don't need to read them together. But this different attitude toward indigenous peoples explains why Paz can argue that every Mexican bears within himself or herself 2,000 years of indigenous past, because the colonizing Catholics from Spain, the religious orders, the Franciscans, the Augustinians, the Dominicans, later the Carmelites, the Jesuits, were all involved in the process and project of converting indigenous peoples. So that's not the case in North America, where we're pluralists. Pluralism is a great thing, I think. There can be Methodists and Catholics and Jews and everyone together. I don't need to agree with someone who's in a different faith particularly. I respect the differences, but I don't need, because I'm a pluralist and I'm a Protestant. I'm just saying I in the sense of a North American Protestant. Doesn't have to make everything into one true faith. There are many ways in the pluralist Protestant ideology, many ways of worshiping. So what happens when the Protestants, Puritans, come to Massachusetts and one of them disagrees with the leadership, Roger Williams? They say, well, fine, you have every right to disagree. Just go out and found your own colony, which he does, Rhode Island. So it's a very different view. If you're a church that is centrist and therefore inclusive, must be inclusive because you are the one true church, as opposed to pluralist and therefore exclusive. It's possible to coexist. There are different attitudes toward toward religious truth, and therefore different ways of treating indigenous peoples. The two are very much connected, and I think the importance of religion cannot be overestimated. When I teach courses in Latin American literature, I stress religion a great deal, because even if the book is not about religion and the writer isn't particularly religious, there are behaviors, these kinds of cultural behaviors that are explained in terms of Catholicism, or indeed in terms of Protestantism if it's a North American novel. Okay, so back to our notes here. It's easy to stray. Look at the idols versus images passage. This is also part of the religion. I've skipped over state versus nation. I leave that to you. Look at page 368. Again, my interest in art is here. If you'll look at the bottom of page 368, let's see, where are we going to start? Bottom of 368, please, the paragraph that starts, a no less profound difference. You see, he like Fuentes, is thinking in terms of oppositions. Fuentes within the Spanish culture. Here, the comparison of these two distinct versions of Western civilization, Mexico and the US. Look at the bottom of 368. A no less profound difference was the opposition between Catholic orthodoxy and Protestant reformism. In Mexico, Catholic orthodoxy had the philosophical form of Neo-Thomism, that's St. Thomas of Aquinas, a mode of thought more apologetic than critical. Apologetic here in the sense of apologetics, meaning it's more about rhetoric, more about explaining the doctrine than critically examining it. That's Paz's point. And defensive in the face of the emerging modernity. Orthodoxy prevented examination and criticism in Mexico. He's saying this is Catholic orthodoxy. In New England, the communities were most often made up of religious dissidents or at least of people who believe that the scriptures should be read freely. On one side, orthodoxy, dogmatic philosophy, and cult of authority, Mexico. On the other, the US, reading and free interpretation of the doctrine. Both societies were religious, but their religious attitudes were irreconcilable. I'm not thinking only of dogmas and principles, but the very ways in which the two societies practiced and understood religion. One society, Mexico, fostered the complex and majestic conceptual structure of orthodoxy, an equally complex ecclesiastical hierarchy, wealthy and militant religious orders, and a ritualistic view of religion in which the sacraments occupied a central place. The other, the US, fostered free description of the scriptures, a small and often poor clergy, a tendency to eliminate the hierarchical boundaries between the simple believer and the priest, and a religious practice based not on ritual but on ethics, and not on the sacrament but on the internalizing of faith. Now those are pretty stark contrasts, and he says it's not really about what's believed, it's the nature of the religious practice and the nature of the religious institutions that separate Mexico and the US. Now you can say, but there are Catholics in the US and the Hispanicization of the US is changing things. Yes, I think we'll discuss this on our discussion board. These are very stark contrasts he's drawing, and one wants to say, but wait a minute, hey, stop. And then there's the Protestantization of Mexico, especially northern Mexico, which Andrew Chestnut is going to talk about later in the semester. The growth of Protestant movements in Latin America. So we can't take this either or too absolutely, and yet I feel he's right. I feel from my own years of experience in Mexico and years of experience in the US that these differences between religious practices and structural systems of institutions is correct. So this rationalism versus dogmatism argument, you know, the critical spirit of the Protestants versus the more dogmatic, authoritarian, if you want. His word is, let's see, how does he put it? Hang on. Cult of authority, the bottom of 368. There's something to be, I think, something to be taken seriously about this opposition that he's laying before us. We've already gotten to our point 4.5. We've touched on this too when he says that every Mexican has within him 2,000 years of indigenous experience. It's something lived, not known, or it may be known too, but it's lived. This history, we've already seen that, but he makes the point again, the U.S. is a land of the future. We tear down anything that's 20 years old, whereas Mexico is the other way around. Look at page 370. I got that page wrong. I'm sorry, it's 370, not 378. I beg your pardon. I could erase that, but I won't. Oh yes, I will. I'll see if I can make it work. 370. Now I have to do that. There. Got it right. Would you look at the paragraph 4 lines down on page 370? Here is the final contradiction, and all of the divergences and differences I have mentioned culminate in it. A society is essentially defined by its position as regards time. That's a big claim. We have to think about that one too, but let's give it to him for now. A society is essentially defined by its position as regards time. The United States, because of its origin and its intellectual and political history, is a society oriented toward the future. The extraordinary spatial mobility of America, a nation constantly on the move, has often been pointed out. In the realm of beliefs and mental attitudes, mobility in time corresponds to physical and geographical displacement. The American lives on the very edge of the now, always ready to leap toward the future. Maybe, probably. The country's foundations are in the future. not in the past. Or rather, its past in the act of its founding was a promise of the future, and each time the United States returns to its source, to its past, it rediscovers the future. Mexico's orientation has been seen as just the opposite. First came the rejection of criticism, and with it, rejection of the notion of change. Its ideal is to conserve the image of divine immutability. Second, it has a plurality of pasts, all present and at war within every Mexican soul. Cortés and Moctezuma are still alive in Mexico. Yeah, October 12th, we'll see. At the time of that great crisis, the Mexican Revolution, the most radical faction, that of Zapata and his peasants, proposed not new forms of social organization, but a return to the communal ownership of land. The rebelling peasants were asking for the devolution of the land. That is, they wanted to go back to pre-Columbian times, to a pre-Columbian form of ownership that had been respected by the Spanish. The image of the revolutionaries instinctively made for themselves of a golden age lay in the remotest past. Utopia for them was not the construction of a future, but the return to the source, to the beginning. The traditional Mexican attitude toward time has been expressed in this way by the Mexican poet Ramón López Velarde. Motherland, be still the same, faithful to each day's mirror. You see, the same move that Octavio Paz that has just made, so Fuentes. Let's talk about huge aspects of culture, relationship to the past, attitude toward the future, toward time, and then let's sum it up with one line from one Mexican poet as exemplary of this attitude. Very hard to talk about large cultural attitudes and prove it, but I think both of them do an interesting, both Fuentes and Paz, who were great friends until they became great enemies. Unfortunately, late in Paz's life, Octavio Paz died probably 10 years ago. I'm not exactly sure how many years ago. Maybe a little less. I'm sorry, I should have looked that up. I hope you will. In any case, Fuentes, the junior, it was junior to Octavio Paz, learned a great deal about making cultural arguments. And what I like to say is I've learned a great deal about Mexico from both of them, so I hope that you are too. Okay, so this point, the traditionalist versus the futurist, is made very starkly here. And then I want to go to the conclusion of the essay. Remember, The New Yorker, 1979. What does he do at the end of this essay? He shakes his finger in no uncertain terms at the U.S. He criticizes U.S. culture for its blindness, for its unwillingness to be exactly like Mexico is, to include the other. Let's look at it. We'll read the rest of this together, and then I will stop. Let's start in the middle of 375 and go to the end, and you can follow along with me, I hope. The crisis of the United States affects the very foundation of the nation, by which I mean the principles that founded it. I have already said that there's a leitmotif running through American history from the Puritan colonies of New England to the present day, namely the tension between freedom and equality. The struggle of the blacks, the Chicanos, and other minorities are an expression of this dualism. An external contradiction corresponds to this internal contradiction. The United States is a republic and an empire. In Rome, the first of these contradictions, the internal one between freedom and equality, was resolved by the suppression of freedom. Caesar's regime began as an egalitarian solution, but like all solutions by force, it ended in the suppression of equality also. The second external contradiction brought about the ruin of Athens, the first imperial republic in history. It would be presumptuous of me to propose solutions to this double contradiction. I think that every time a society finds itself in crisis, it instinctively turns its eyes toward its origins and looks there for a sign. Colonial American society was free, egalitarian, but exclusive. Faithful to its origins in its domestic and foreign policies alike, the United States has always ignored the others. That's a terrible indictment. Today, the United States faces very powerful enemies, 1979, but the mortal danger comes from within. Not from Moscow, but from the mixture of arrogance and opportunism, blindness and short-term Machiavellianism, volubility and stubbornness, which has characterized its foreign policy during recent years, and which reminds us of an odd way of the Athenian state in its quarrel with Sparta. Unfortunately, the volubility and stubbornness that characterizes our foreign policy, we hope we can learn from the past, but there is something about that remains true to this day. To conquer its enemies, the United States must first conquer itself, return to its origins, not to repeat them, but to rectify them. The others, the minorities inside as well as the marginal countries and nations outside, do exist. Not only do we others make up the majority of the human race, but also each marginal society, poor though it may be, represents a unique and precious version of mankind. If the United States is to recover fortitude and lucidity, it must recover itself, and to recover itself, it must recover the others, the outcasts of the Western world. Well, this is a real call to arms. As I say, it's a finger-wagging operation of a Mexican with huge cultural authority, condemning, really outright condemning the U.S. for its blindness, its selfishness, and so forth. Now, we may not want to agree with that. We may want to defend ourselves and say, but wait a minute, look at our educational policies. We make education more available to our citizens than most countries do, certainly more available than in Mexico. We might want to hold up our virtues one way or another. But this is Octavio Paz's indictment, that we are a pluralist culture, therefore we can exclude whomever we want by just saying, well, you go and do it your way because I'm doing it my way. As I say, I think pluralism is a wonderful thing. It can be a wonderful thing, but here, at least in the founding, he says indigenous populations were ignored because they were other. There was no idea of including them. They can be the way they are, and as long as we don't need their land, we'll just keep them over here, unlike the Catholic centrism, which requires inclusive policies. Okay, where are we? I think I'll have a drink. I will be very much in touch with you on our website. You will see that the different lecturers, there are about a dozen of us who are lecturing in this course, are listed on your syllabus. I put up everyone's website so you can take a look and see who's in store and what that person department is and what that lecturer tends to write about in his or her work. I hope that you'll find the diversity of lecturing and lecture styles and subject matters and disciplinary approaches to be informative, and our website will anchor what sometimes tends to, it seems almost to fly off in too many directions at once because of all of the lecturers, but our website will anchor us. I'll be posing questions, asking you to discuss them, and we'll be on board that way. So with that, I'm going to sign off and say welcome again, and I hope that we have a fun time this semester. Bye.